All right, well, we're going to get started. This is the 28 Minutes of Sanity podcast. I am JJ. Paul is here as usual. Hey, Paul.
Hey, how are you?
And as you know,
You didn't answer me.
What? Oh, yeah. I was thinking about the next thing. What did you ask me?
I asked how you were.
I'm fine.
Oh,
Thanks.
Thank you. Now I feel better.
Good. With this podcast, we're playing with ideas, how to get the podcast to interact with the class that we're doing. And so for the first time, we have an in-studio guest. Jess McHargue is with us. Jess, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good. Jess, if somebody is watching this podcast and doesn't know anything about you, do you have a 30-second intro, explainer who you are?
Well, if I would have known that, I would have sent some intro music to Paul.
Okay.
That he could have, really hyped me up on my entry there. But
what would your walk-up song be if you like to pump up your appearance? What would you pick for a song?
I think it would be Armies by KB.
Okay.
So like the real soft intro and then have a beat drop.
Uh-huh.
And then that's when the camera would come on me.
Okay.
So, we could do that next time, right, Paul? Like that's a...
I would love to bring that in. However, I'm really thinking that would be copyrighted.
It probably
I could be
would.
wrong.
Okay.
I could get permission.
There you
Or
go.
we could find a generic version of it somewhere.
Mm-hmm. We could have JJ rap.
No, we don't want to lose people. So
Oh, that's right.
I vote for JJ Rap.
Okay.
The best way to not get copyrighted.
All right. So I brought somebody in hoping they would keep us on the rails, and we're quickly off the rails here. But Jess, who are you? Can you give us your story real quick?
Yeah, so really quick, for the last decade, I was in Lexington, Nebraska, where I was an English and history teacher. And then for the last 3 years, I served as youth pastor at Parkview Baptist Church. And then my wife and I, we felt like God was really putting on our hearts something different for our kids' education. And she went to Nebraska Christian back in the day. And so we came and we toured and fell in love with the campus. I was honored to be offered the opportunity to apply for a job, and then God opened doors, and we jumped all in. That's kind of been Annalise and I's go-to. If we feel like God's calling us somewhere, we hold hands, jump in, 4 feet forward, and just trust God's going to take care of us. So we've been here since September.
Okay. At
the schools. I've been working since July, and our family's just really thriving. We're enjoying Central City, the community at Nebraska Christian, and now jumping in to be a part of the community here at Heartland.
All right. Well, we love it. Love that you're getting connected here. Love that you decided to come on. You came to the class the first week, and it wasn't really, I think it was your plan, but you've kind of been roped into substitute teaching, partly because of my illness and some travel I've got going on. And so appreciate you doing that. Appreciate you being on the podcast here. Let's dive in. Actually, let's not dive in yet. I want to tell you a couple things. If you do want to follow us on Twitter, we are at 28MIN of Sanity. If you want to interact with us, whether you're local or whether you're watching the podcast from anywhere, you can send us an email, 28minutesofsanity@gmail.com. Before we get to today's topic, I want to mention a couple of things that are coming up that might be of interest locally or to anybody who might be listening. One, the first podcast that we released a couple of weeks ago, we had our guest Ben Blowers, and Ben is the head of Ratio Christi College Prep over in Lincoln, and he's putting on an event in Lincoln next weekend, the February 4th and 5th. The name of the event is Escaping Polygamy, and he's got a couple guests coming to Lincoln, Doris Hanson and Carrie Bradshaw. I got to meet Doris a few years ago out in Utah, and she actually grew up in a polygamous community and was saved out of that before she married into polygamy, and she's coming to talk about what her experience has been like. And she leads a ministry out in Utah to women and children who are trapped in polygamist culture, which is a really enslaving kind of situation. And it's the kind of thing that it's kind of become well known because I think there's a show on Bravo about it, and people have some sense of what it is, but these are real people who are involved in this. And some of the stuff that I've actually gotten to see with my own eyes, you'd be amazed, is actually happening here in America. And so So Doris, and I'm not sure, I don't know much about Carrie, but I believe Carrie's connected to Doris's ministry as well. They'll be speaking at First Street Bible Church in Lincoln, Friday, the February 4th, 2022, and then the next day, February 5th. And in the show notes, we're going to put a link there. I did text Ben, and they're going to offer some kind of live stream. And so if you want to watch the live stream, get in touch with me, and I can help you figure out how to watch that. But just want to make people aware of that. And then the following Friday, this one actually is out of state, but there's a live stream with this one as well. Tim Stratton of Free Thinking Ministries is doing a debate down in Houston with James White. And Tim and James are two apologists that I respect a lot, but they've disagreed over the nature of how we reconcile God's sovereignty with man's freedom. And so Tim is going to be representing the Molinist position. James is going to be representing the Calvinist position on that. And there's a live stream option for that as well. And so we're going to be providing the links for both those things, but just anytime there's something like that going on, we want to be able to promote it and let people know about it. And so just wanted to mention both those events that are coming up here in the next couple weeks. So diving in, I was sick last weekend, and so Jess jumped in and was able to lead the class for us. Jess, can you just talk for a second about how do you think things went? Just give an overview of how things went with the class.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and let's go back, leading is a very loose term. It was definitely facilitating, because when you hit play and you're a true substitute teacher, you're just facilitating at that point, right? So let's make sure that was clear.
Okay.
But I think
I wouldn't ask just anybody to press play, Jess. So I don't sell yourself too short.
That's
you
good.
Passed a rigorous background check in my head before I asked you to press play. So,
and I didn't even know Paul, but I'm assuming Paul endorsed me probably.
I did.
Yeah. That's
Paul.
good.
Paul was in law enforcement, and he's good at sizing people up, and
That's
so
right.
you didn't trigger any red flags. So you got that going for you.
The best part was I didn't even have to see you,
Yeah,
or hear your name, or get asked. He just knew I would say yes.
Yep.
That's
and then
good.
We're good to go.
That's good. No, but in regards to the class, I think it went really well. Because I think the first week, JJ, it was all about, why are you here? Really trying to grasp why does it matter? Why do we need a class like this in a culture that is slowly, we could say, crumbling around us, just a confused all around, from top down, from leadership and all the way down to what's being taught to our kids at school. So a class like this has a really important role for everybody. It can give you confidence in your faith and really help you to be light in darkness, which, that's what we're called to do. The word that got used a lot and that you introduced us to with ambassadors, like being ambassadors really matters, even now, more than ever. So we started the class by hitting play, jumped in and listened to a Stand to Reason presentation. And, I felt like everyone was a little nervous because you weren't there and no one knew me.
Right.
They didn't know Paul had endorsed me before.
Right.
And so we were all kind of feeling each other out. It was that awkward moment. But I went teacher mode because that's in my background.
Yep.
And we went right away to some partner. And the first thing you had to talk about was when you're in you have the opportunity to share your faith. Are you one to jump at that opportunity? Are you reluctant because you feel like you don't have the answers? You're equipped to maybe enter tough conversations. And we were all over the board.
Right.
There were some people in the room that they were bring on the awkwardness. There were quite a few that's I will if it happens. And then there was people who were just brutally honest. They're you know what? I avoid those. If I feel like it's going to take a turn to talk about tough topics, like we talked about, same-sex marriage, pluralism, or even abortion, they're I just don't want to be in that place because I don't feel confident in what I have to say. Or, one thing that we talked a lot about early on was relationship matters.
Right.
If it's a stranger, then maybe you're willing to jump in.
Right.
If it's someone that you love, is part of your family, and you've butted heads before on a topic, then you're probably more willing to not have the conversation, even though it's an important one to have. So I thought that was really good that we all aired it out, and we were all okay with not being okay in some extent on that side. So, yeah, it was a great start. And then,
and I appreciate you starting that way, Jess, because just mapping all that out, like for younger kids to hear older people say, I don't quite know how to talk about this stuff either. That's a little bit liberating. You think, well, it's just a matter of when I'm older, I'll figure this stuff out. And that doesn't happen automatically. That we all need to kind of figure out where we're at and grow from there. And so to talk that through and give people permission to just say, here's where I am. My goal is to take the next step and to grow is really, really a huge thing.
Well, and I used Ecclesiastes 10:10 to like lead that class off of just saying like, man, you've got to sharpen your axe every day. You have to seek wisdom, seek knowledge, and doing those things when you're filled with the Holy Spirit, that's where that comes from.
Right.
You know, it was brought up like, I'm never going to lead someone to fully turn away. It's going to have to be the Holy Spirit working through me and in them. And so that confidence comes from knowing that, being equipped in that, and it just takes some of that pressure off.
Yeah.
Like they're not going to ultimately hate you.
Right.
Like you got to not be afraid of that rejection. But it just helps when that's the way you view it.
Yeah. Just to have that basic starting point. And like you said, the Holy Spirit does the work. That does take the pressure off. But not the obligation to be faithful, not the call to be an ambassador.
Right.
We still proclaim the message to the best of our ability. The gospel means that we're not going to do it perfectly, that it's going to be okay, but the gospel also frees us to get in the batter's box, so to speak, to speak truth as we can. And every one of us learns from those encounters. We learn from our failures, we learn from our successes, we grow, and growth really is the goal in those things. So you framed it that way. Where did it go from there then?
And so then we really just kind of followed along. We let the video guide us and lead us. We talked about, what it takes to be an ambassador again, just hitting on like knowledge leads to wisdom, because that's the action part of that. And then we got into the hard part. The questions came up with like, how would you enter into discussion with same-sex marriage, pluralism, or abortion when they get brought up? And so I kind of tweaked the assignment. That's what substitute teachers do, right?
Sure.
We don't have to follow the guideline too close. But so we collected what I think we're going to kind of talk about and have this be kind of our focus here as you help us unpack some of these. But the phrases that get brought up that can be stumbling points for us, as in like, how do I interact with someone who says this? Because I can't recall scripture right away.
Right.
I can't like be angry and like fire back, because that's not being an ambassador. So
Right.
how do I start navigating?
As soon as you lose your temper, you've lost, right?
That's
right.
right.
That's a guarantee.
And so that's what we collected first. So we had kind of a starting point, just knowing how the video would unpack it. It was going to lead us to tactics on how we can be great ambassadors, how we can be in the driver's seat, and the pressure's off of us. I think that was one thing that everyone heard and walked away with. Like, you don't have to have all the answers. Like, keep putting it back on them. Ask good questions. Make them reveal what they really believe. Because even when I look at some of these catchphrases that we captured, these are ideas that are just out there.
Yep.
And people who maybe are, I don't know, loose in their own opinions will just grab onto what's trendy and have that be their belief system. And they don't really know what it means.
Yeah.
So it's not our job to define their beliefs. It's our job to defend the faith.
Right. Right. Yeah. And as I look at some of the phrases that you guys came up with in the class, I'm kind of forming some thoughts on how I might counsel somebody on some of these. And I think you said this already, but three major areas: one in the category same-sex marriage, one in the area of religious pluralism, and then one in the area of the abortion question or right to life. Before I go at any of these, one of the bits of counsel that I would give is, these phrases, none of these caught me off guard. And I would counsel people in general to notice bumper stickers, notice commercials, notice slogans. And before you end up discussing one of these with somebody, notice them on a bumper sticker, and if you have the space or the margin, do a little homework. Look to a resource like Stand to Reason. Go talk to a pastor. Just talk to an older believer, and kind of in a safe space, sharpen your axe a little bit and say, how should I be thinking about this? It's so much less pressure packed if you can do this with somebody you know cares about you, where you can just learn and question safely and think through some of this stuff. If you can, if you have the choice, it's better to have your first conversations there, because you can, just like you practice for a few weeks or months before you get in the ball game, and that way your mistakes are less costly. That's one of the bits of counsel that I would give, and you kind of said it, I think, but be a student ahead of time, develop some knowledge if you can. You're never going to be like, okay, I've hit the 100% on the knowledge level. Now it's time to start talking to people. It's going to be an interactive process, but that's one bit of counsel I would give.
Well, and I would jump in and add there, JJ, I think, transitioning from being an English teacher into what I felt God was calling me to do as a youth pastor, I had students who asked some really hard questions.
Right.
And, I was doing seminary at the same time. I was really working on my knowledge base, but sometimes I just had to jot the question down and go and find an answer.
Yeah.
I think people have a ton of respect for you.
Oh yeah.
If you are willing to say, you know what, like, man, what a great question. I want to converse with you about it, but first I want to go look into it. I think people have respect for you if you do it that way. You have it's a great way of also defending the faith in a way where you're not putting your own thoughts into it or misquoting or misinterpreting or leading even further down a rabbit trail necessarily.
Right.
So I would just add that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been in situations where I heard a question I didn't know how to answer, and the competitive part of you wants to win. And so you bluff, and you're like, well, I don't know if this is 100% true, but I'm going to say it because I don't want to lose face here, and you're going to regret that approach. And so, like you just said, just the ability to say, great question, I don't know, can I get back to you on that, that's honorable, that's authentic, that's true, that respects the person, shows that you really care about truth and not just getting the last word in. And so you modeling that for your students in the past, that's something that we talk about a lot. When we do our trips, we hand out a list of key phrases. And one of the key phrases, that's a great question, I don't know, can I get back to you, is really a key, something to have in your bag of tricks for these conversations. There's no shame in that. No shame in not knowing. So, Jess, any one of these, as I look this over, in a few weeks, we've got a podcast already recorded with Michael Spencer of Project Life Voice, and we're going to dedicate at least an entire class to the life issue. So I want to bracket that one out. Since you were in the room, Jess, is there any one of these that you think we need to lead with this one, of the remaining two categories or 5 or 6 comments that people were wondering what to do with? Is there one that we should maybe model unpacking?
For me, there's like a little bit of bias just because it did come from a student.
Sure.
But the one under same-sex marriage, if it's not hurting anyone, what's the harm in it?
Oh, sure.
I think that must be a phrase that is maybe used around with youth a little bit more. That's where it came from. I feel like that would be a really important one. And then I think something that comes up, and I think it fits into way more areas than just what we have on the paper here, but a loving God would never punish anyone. I think that's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot.
Right.
In different areas about different things. And even people who just are looking to pick a fight, that's a phrase that they'll throw out and use, like, how can a loving God punish someone? So those would be the two, if we have time, to chase down, that I would lob out as, let's do that.
Yeah. Let's start with the first one you mentioned first. That phrase, if it's not hurting anyone, what is the harm? And when I hear that, I think back to debates I had with my parents growing up over, we wanted to watch something on TV. My parents would say, I don't know if you should be watching that. And we'd say, what's wrong with it? And my mom or my dad would always come back with, well, what's right with it? And those are conversations I had 30 years ago, and I'm just at the point of understanding the wisdom in what they were saying. There's kind of a creational wisdom in, are we truly just created to not do harm? Like that, to me, that's a starting point, is what are we even made for? What is our purpose here? Is our sole purpose to go through life not making an impact? And as long as if I'm 100 years old and the best I can say is I didn't harm anyone, that's a wasted life. Like that is not a goal-directed life, a fulfilling life. So I would vaguely start there, but then I would also, in the context, so I'm going to pull, I went to the context of me as a kid debating with my parents. I'm going to bring it back to, on one level, a policy question, right? About marriage. How do we define marriage? In my story, before I took on this role as pastor here at Heartland, I actually did work in public policy, and I worked for a group that lobbied for traditional marriage, lobbied for the unborn, for the family. And I had not, this is going back 15 years, I had not studied this issue extensively. And I actually thought, you know what, that is a valid objection. If two guys want to have a wedding ceremony, or two women want to have a wedding ceremony, does that instantly cause society to crumble? And I can say, no, not directly or not instantly. But what I want to do in this situation, if I've really done my homework, is to pull back and to say, not does an individual act of same-sex marriage affect things greatly, but pull way back and start at the beginning with a separate question. And what is the public purpose of marriage to start with? And I'm going to actually start by changing this question to a different question. Why did for centuries, why did America define marriage a certain way? And why have other cultures, regardless of whether they have the influence of Christianity or not, defined marriage for centuries, for millennia, a particular way? And really dive deep into that question. And when you study that question, when you look at why that is the case, you'll see that independently, all these different groups have discovered that defining marriage a particular way, one man, one woman, actually has proven itself. You can look at data to be better for cultures and to be better for children. And so that's a pretty sophisticated, long way around, but I would, if I had a chance, I would switch that question to that. Why did traditional marriage, why was it entrenched in so many places for so long as it was? Chesterton has a famous quote. He said this. He said, if I'm going to go tear down a fence, the first thing I'm going to do is ask myself, why was that fence built in the first place? And if somebody wants to tear that fence down, if they can't answer that question, I'm going to tell them, don't tear it down yet, because somebody probably built that fence for a reason. And if you know the reason they built it, then maybe you have a reason to tear it down. And so I'm using a version of that idea that Chesterton had to come at this question. So I just ended up talking for a long time, and I could keep talking because I'm only about a third of the way through my answer. But I want to give you guys a chance to jump in and respond to anything you've heard me say up to this point.
Sure. I totally understand that. And I think that's one thing when I think back to the people in the class and what they voiced on like how they would want to interact with someone like this. The one method that we were able to see in the videos was the Columbo method. Mm-hmm. And that's the asking continual questions, putting it back on them. I think when I read this again and again, because I looked at it over the week, knowing that I had a guest appearance coming up, I think one of the more important questions to turn around and ask somebody that maybe says this to you is like, can you define hurting and harm? Like what are the true, like what do they picture that as? Like hurting what, hurting who? It's not hurting anyone. Well, it's hurting me. And really like have them explain like, what do you mean by that? And like, what's the harm? Like, what's harm to you?
Right.
Because that enters that cultural question that you brought up. Like, there is hard data out there on, if there are kids that don't have a father figure. And there's hard data that kids that don't have a mother in their life. Like there is hard and fast scientific information that can tell us that there is, in fact, a long-lasting harm on someone that grows up in an environment like that. So I think having them really unpack their response will help you understand how, like, can I go sophisticated with them, or do we need to stay on this level of like, you don't really know what that means,
right?
So let's unpack this a little bit and really begin to understand why that's your defense.
And then I think you can add too is, you say you're not going to harm anybody. Where do you draw the line? Are you harming yourself or your partner? Because you almost have to define what harm is. And even if you are doing it in your own home in secret, or even not in secret, is it harmful or not just to yourself?
Right. And we're taking the long way. I mean, we're getting to Scripture, and biblically, same-sex sexual relationships are harmful. But somebody who is asking this question may not be ready to hear that yet.
Yeah, definitely.
You want to get them to the place where they can. But yeah, Jess, your question of just thinking about the nature of hurting, the nature of harm, if you can get somebody to go there, you're going to start to explore these assumptions that we're created for something. And so there's a kind of creationist sense built in there. Got a text from my wife, but it's not an emergency. So
she's going to watch this and have proof that you ignored her text. Okay. And I'm going to make sure she knows that's what happened.
You can tell her. Just make sure it's not an emergency. But yeah, beginning to frame it in appropriate terms is a really big deal because you're getting at something, a kind of moral argument for what is right, what is wrong to start with, and who decides. And that's the larger question that we want to get at with everybody. So yeah, you kind of, even by doing that, you're I think giving somebody pause, say, oh my goodness, even if they won't admit it, even if they have an agenda, you're kind of forced to say, oh, there may be more to this than I've considered. Maybe they haven't considered that yet. One note I just jotted down: if you're hearing this is the only podcast you listen to, and you're questioning the claim that we're making that there is hard data on these things, I want to direct you to 3 different places. I'm going to drop 3 names on you. One is Glenn Stanton, who's done some great work on explaining kind of some of the harm of these things. A guy named Mark Regnerus at the University of Texas has done some great work on this stuff. And there's a lady named Katie Faust who's done a lot of great work on these things as well. And I know how you all know how to use the Google machine. So I feel like just throwing out those names is a good step one if you want to go deeper on those things. So,
well, and I would add one last thing to this idea. My wife said it, and I can't remember where we first heard it, but she's like, our role is to be a surgeon. A surgeon is someone who is very fine-tuned, and you're going after a specific thing. We're not going after the person here.
Right.
I'm not trying to bulldoze anyone, but truly to be a surgeon and get at the heart of where they're coming from, why they said what they said. And you've got to unpack those little parts.
Yeah.
Like hurting and harm are important words to understand.
Right.
And what they're bringing to the table. If they've been hurt,
exactly,
if they've been harmed, and that's where their backstory is, like, it allows you to get into that space and speak truth.
Right.
And it might not even be about that topic then ultimately, but it's a heart thing now. Like, you have that open window because you were a surgeon about it.
Yeah.
You weren't bulldozing people over. inserting yourself where you weren't needed to be. So
Yeah, your means of responding to a question like this could turn into an invitation. This could be the question they're asking to find out, are you a safe person to talk about what I really want to talk about? I actually do have some heart level stuff that I'm terrified to talk about with anybody. So I'm going to lead with this, and I'm going to size you up based on how you respond to this. There's always, to keep it in the back of our minds, there's always more going on than meets the eye is really, really important and something that an ambassador needs to develop. So, so we got a ways into unpacking that one. I did kind of an introduction on, how I would reframe the question. The question being, why have we defined marriage a particular way? And just so I can, if anybody's like, well, where was he going with this? I want to walk quickly through the argument. We may take another podcast or a class to much more slowly walk through this. But the question's not hurting or harming anyone. On the narrow level, that could be true. There may not be huge ramifications in the immediate sense, but the broader question, the road that I try to walk, if somebody really has just an intellectual desire to understand the answer to this question, the broader question I go to is, what are the effects on society if we shift the definition of marriage for everyone, the traditional marriage, one man, one woman, changing the definition to any two people, what will the effects be? And what I would want to point out to somebody, again, this is if you have enough time to really slowly walk somebody through this, is all of a sudden you're saying that within the context of marriage, it really doesn't matter if children have both a mother and a father. You're saying that within the context of family, as long as there's two people, it's going to be the same outcome for kids. And now what you're doing is you're shifting the burden of proof to them, and you're saying, can you demonstrate to my satisfaction that within a given marriage, a man is unnecessary or a woman is unnecessary? And I would ask them, I want you to do your homework, do some research, do some study, find out, is this really the case? And some of these researchers that we've talked about, and really if you just talk to people about their stories, you'll find out that it's not the case, that men and women are perfectly interchangeable. Regardless of some current cultural madness, we know that biologically we're not interchangeable. And then it's fair to ask, could it go beyond that? Could it go beyond biology to kind of the nature of men and women? Now, biblically speaking, we know that's the case. Experientially, I think we can demonstrate that that's the case. And if we can, then we have good reason to say, let's not run this fast down this path, And I would even, I've seen this kind of bandied about, but I've seen this cartoon where someone gets up and says, well, on our corporate board, we need diversity. We need all perspectives. We need men, women, blah, blah, blah. We have to have diversity here. And in this cartoon, the crowd is cheering. But then if somebody gets up and says, within marriage, we need diversity, we need a man and a woman, all of a sudden it's like, well, no, wait, they're interchangeable. And as a culture, we want to have our cake and eat it too. The pushback has been, well, we need diversity in our groups. We need the perspectives of men and women. But if you say, well, let's just apply it to marriage, you're shouted down as a bigot in our culture. And to observe that, to make those kinds of observations, I think is really valuable. And I would just start there and then point people to the research and just the common experience that what we're doing really is a radical social experiment. And to say children don't need a mother and a father flies in the face really of all sorts of accumulated wisdom, research, biblical claims. And again, just throw the burden of proof back on the person you're talking to. So that's kind of my big picture outline of how I would come after it. But I don't know what would you guys add to that?
I think it's really hard too to find out what actually is credible science versus non, especially nowadays, like we talked about in a previous podcast with the whole transgender movement of they're literally people saying they are interchangeable. So that almost, if you truly believe that destroys your marriage argument because there's no such thing as man and woman. They're interchangeable. So whatever happens. Doesn't matter.
Right. And that gets us to, as a culture, we are at an epistemic crisis. We're at a crisis of how do we know anything? Because so many institutions have been fundamentally dishonest to us. And so when I claim that I have scientific backing for something, you actually have a right to say, well, show your work. And that's where our knowledge really does come down to trust. Do I trust someone? And you can do your homework a little bit and find out, are the people that I've put forth trustworthy? I think that they are. Are their critics trustworthy? I think you can quickly find that a lot of their critics are not trustworthy. A lot of their critics are agenda driven. And so we can, it's not that we're stuck with not knowing. We can still know some stuff. We can still get pretty close to the truth on these things. But even if we get stuck in some kind of impasse, one thing that an ambassador can do, like you said, Jess, is just do a good job unpacking the question and showing the question itself. Maybe there's way more to it than it looks like at the beginning. So,
yeah, not only that, but just if you are around somebody, just treat them with love, because they might think you're turned off by the way they live their life. But I have friends that are that way, and I love them, and they're great, and what they do is no worse than things that I do, and we're all sinners, and it doesn't change that we're image bearers of God.
Right. The idea that we're in some kind of competition and I need to own my opponent or whatever. If we can just shift our perspective to, I need to be a genuine truth seeker. I need to really be humble before what can be known. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and so if I fear God, then I don't have to be afraid of arguments, and I don't have to be insecure within the context of a disagreement. It looked like you were ready to fire up a comment, Jess. Were you going to say something there?
No, I was taking notes.
Okay.
For myself.
Right.
For class next week.
All right.
Or later that I lead this week.
Okay.
I need to be ready with some notes.
Okay, cool.
Are you doing it again this week?
Yeah. I think JJ's just taking vacation or something.
In fact, I am. For quite a while, I've been scheduled to be down in Florida this weekend. So, but I'm like claiming that it's healing because I went there 4 years ago and I was attacked by a pelican. And so, true story, I've got pictures with blood and everything. And so instead of vacation, I'm calling this part of the healing process is I need to go back to the scene of my trauma and like work through it and hopefully not get bit by a pelican this time. But yeah, that's
funny
what I'm going to be doing.
My parents and sister went down there, and I don't remember what it was. I don't know if it was a pelican or something else, but it got all bloody because it's got its head bitten off by I don't know if it was a shark or alligator, but it just happens instantly where everybody was standing around watching.
Okay.
So that was pretty yucky.
Right.
It was probably the one that attacked JJ.
It probably was. That's what made me think of it.
Yeah, he's going to be
so
fine
now you have payback. You're welcome.
Might have been. Okay. Yeah. It's satisfying to know that pelican probably got what's coming to him. But I think we've gone through so many threads here. There's probably no good way to tie them all together. But we are at the 38-minute mark. And so I think we're going to land the plane here, unless you guys have anything else you want to throw in real quick.
I think it almost needs to be like a 10-part series of just this one topic because we didn't even actually touch any of it. It was more of an intro.
Right.
But
right.
I don't know what were you going to say, Jess?
Well, I was just going to add to that. Like the last thing I think really wraps up what you were saying, JJ, is the burden of proof can be turned back onto the person who's made this comment. But we also need to be sound in how we go about finding our research.
Right.
Like the Bible is our truth, but there is like hard and fast information that can be found in support.
Right.
And we need to be diligent about double checking and triple checking that if we're going to bring it to a conversation.
Exactly.
It doesn't help anybody if we Google the first thing that we read. And obviously, like, kids know this, but like Wikipedia should not be what you're citing in a research paper. It should also not be a part of the wisdom and the knowledge that you're bringing into some of these conversations. Like, you have the same task to be well-rounded, be informed, and if you're truly going to enter these conversations, you want to be full of truth and grace.
Exactly.
And that matters.
Right.
Like, it matters to do it the right way.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, doing it the right way is really important. Doing our epistemology, how we know what we know, being very careful that we don't just believe a thing because we'd like it to be true, being humble before what we learn, being wise about what sources to use, being careful about what arguments to use. That's really important. That's also a lifelong process. I mean, the last couple of years, especially, there were a lot of things I thought I had figured out 2 years ago, and they've kind of just been overturned the last couple of years as far as, in some cases, who I thought was trustworthy, in some cases, some beliefs I had about the world and about different, that's a whole other conversation. But recognizing that's a lifelong process. It's not, by the time I'm 25, I want to have some idea mastered. Growing in Christ likeness and all that goes along with it really is something we're going to carry out until we die. And so we need to want to get better at it, and we need to want to recognize, here's where I did that poorly, here's how I could do it better. That's really something that needs to be part of our thought process and part of our growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So we're going to wind it up here. We appreciate you watching, listening. Like so many of these topics, there are a million directions we could have gone, but we hope to launch some conversations. If you watch this and want to approach any of us on the street, or just grab us and say, hey, I thought that was interesting, I think we all welcome that. If you want to follow our Twitter account at 28MIN of Sanity, if you see this and want to shoot us a question or comment that we can maybe use on the podcast, 28minutesofsanity@gmail.com. Paul, thanks today. Jess, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.